On June 22, 2007, an officer with Michigan's West Bloomfield Police Department recorded this footage on the dash camera of his vehicle during an early morning patrol. Up ahead, he had spotted a male driver who appeared to be in the middle of doing something at the side of the road. Exactly what that wasn't clear, though at one point it looked like the man bent over and picked something up off the ground before putting it into a black plastic trash bag. When the officer pulled over and asked the man what he was doing, he replied that he had found a dead possum on the road. He said he stopped to collect the remains so that he could give the animal a proper burial. The man then opened up the bed topper of his pickup truck and showed the officer the same plastic bag he had seen moments earlier. Sure enough, there was a dead possum inside, and the man was allowed to go on his way. However, this strange encounter would take on entirely new meaning just a day later, when this same man was arrested after a second traffic stop. It was then that police would learn the true and incredibly disturbing reason that he had actually been collecting the roadkill the previous morning. And no, it wasn't because he was an animal lover. Just after midnight on June 15, 2007, officers with Michigan's Macomb County Sheriff's Office received a concerned call from a 71-year-old man named Roger Blanchard. Roger said that he needed officers to come to his house right away. He was worried about his 50-year-old girlfriend, Marilou Johnson, who he hadn't seen in close to 24 hours. When police arrived at Roger's home in Washington Township, they were met by him as well as Marilou's three sons, 15-year-old Jarrell, 16-year-old Jared, and 20-year-old Jason Johnson. The boys said that they had no idea where their mother was either. Jared and Jarrell both said that they had first noticed their mother's absence when they got home from school the previous afternoon. Usually their mom was there waiting for them, and they would spend some time talking about their days. However, on this particular afternoon, she was nowhere to be found. The boys didn't think much of this until they spoke with their older brother Jason, as well as Roger, both of whom confirmed that they hadn't heard from Marilou either. Over the next several hours, Roger and the boys said that they had made repeated attempts to contact Marilou. However, all of these were unsuccessful. This was extremely unusual, as normally, even if she missed a call, Marilou was the type to always phone back a few minutes later. The boys reached out to their mother's friends, but none of them had seen her or said that they had plans with her either. Roger explained that the last time he had seen Marilou was the previous morning, June 14th. During a brief conversation, she told him that she was running out to do some errands, and he said it was possible she might have gone for a jog afterwards. He told officers he wondered if maybe she had gotten injured while she was out and hadn't been able to contact anyone as a result. After getting all this information, police drove around the area accompanied by Roger as well as Marilou's sons. They went down all the usual routes the 50-year-old might have taken if she left the house the previous day, but unfortunately, there was no sign of her anywhere. Hoping to find additional clues, investigators asked Roger if they could refocus their search back on his house. He agreed, giving officers full permission to look wherever they needed to. Now, I should mention that doing a thorough search of Roger Blanchard's property was no small task. His house alone was about 10,000 square feet. Actually, calling it a house is really underselling it. The thing was a mansion. The palatial residence was worth at least $2.5 million at the time and sat on a beautiful 3-acre lot with plenty of tree cover obscuring it from surrounding roads. Authorities went through the place methodically, room by room, looking for signs of anything out of the ordinary. Nothing appeared to be out of place, though they did notice that several of Marilou's personal items were missing. This included her purse, cell phone, and interestingly, her passport. Since Marilou was from the Philippines and most of her family still lived there, police asked Roger and her sons if it was possible that she would have gone there. Maybe there had been some kind of emergency and she had needed to leave immediately, so she hadn't been able to let them know of her plans. Marilou's sons doubted this, and it turned out that their instincts were correct. Officers were able to speak with her sister in the Philippines, who confirmed that she was not there and that she didn't know of any reason that she would have suddenly traveled there either. When detectives asked Roger if he could think of any other reason why Marilou would have suddenly left, he said absolutely not. They hadn't had any kind of argument or falling out, so there wouldn't have been any reason for her to leave. Besides, if she had actually gone somewhere, like other than for a jog or something, she would have definitely taken her vehicle, but her car was still parked at the house. Authorities continued their meticulous search of Roger's sprawling residence, even going as far as to completely drain the home's large in-ground pool in case they had missed something. The longer this went on, though, the harder it was for Marilou's loved ones not to fear the worst. One by one, all of the innocent explanations for her disappearance were evaporating, leaving only a growing sense of uneasiness and dread. Investigators, meanwhile, were also becoming convinced that they might be dealing with something extremely serious. But after 3 days with no breakthroughs, they knew they needed to change tactics. They would start by taking a deeper look at the life of their missing woman. Though no one wanted to consider the possibility that something terrible had happened to Marilou Johnson, several days after her disappearance, there were now a number of ominous signs that couldn't be ignored. She hadn't contacted any friends or family members since June 14th, and records revealed that her cell phone and credit cards, which were also missing, hadn't been used since then either. More and more, police were beginning to suspect foul play. Finding themselves without any real leads, however, detectives with the Macomb County Sheriff's Office decided to switch their focus from the on-the-ground search to delving more into Marilou's personal life. They decided to start with the obvious elephant in the room, her relationship with her boyfriend, Roger Blanchard. Almost immediately, authorities zeroed in on the more than 20-year age difference between Roger and Marilou. They wanted to know, was the relationship a real one, or was there something else going on? Now, you probably already put two and two together based on the giant mansion stuff I mentioned before, but suffice it to say, Roger Blanchard was an extremely wealthy man. He was a brilliant engineer with a number of patents to his name, and had owned and operated a company called ACR Industries that specialized in complex gear parts for organizations like NASA. When he retired in the year 2000, Roger sold the company. It's not clear for how much, but given his lifestyle, it's estimated his net worth was many millions of dollars. Marilou Johnson, on the other hand, came from a much different background. As previously mentioned, she was born in the Philippines, in a city called Iloilo, on the island of Panay. After immigrating to the United States, Marilou had met a man named James Johnson. The pair fell in love, married, and had 3 sons, Jared, Jarrell, and Jason. For years, the family was extremely happy, though sadly, it wouldn't last. Tragedy struck when James was diagnosed with leukemia. He ultimately passed away in 2001. Despite being dealt an incredibly difficult hand, Marilou's son said that she held the family together. She worked hard to provide the best type of life that she could for them, even if that meant putting in extremely long hours. Unfortunately, supporting everyone was still a struggle for Marilou financially, but those who knew her said that she never complained. She wasn't the type of person to feel sorry for herself, and instead put all of her focus into raising her boys. For about 4 years, Marilou and her sons went on this way, adjusting to their new normal, until Marilou met Roger Blanchard. Marilou was actually introduced to Roger by his son Scott, who at one point lived across from her family in their apartment complex. Scott had been aware of what was going on with her husband James, and had helped out here and there with things like buying groceries or driving the boys to football practice. Eventually, Scott had the idea that Marilou might get along with his dad, who had also lost his wife and was going through a bit of a tough time. He was right, and Marilou and Roger had ended up falling for each other. After they had been dating for a while, Roger had insisted that she and the boys come to live with him. Virtually overnight, Marilou and her sons' lives completely changed. They moved out of their small apartment and into Roger's mansion, and he began to lavish all of them with expensive gifts. Roger bought Marilou a brand new convertible, spent lots of money on the boys, and bought them vehicles too as they became old enough to drive. After hearing all of this, detectives saw a potential motive. They wondered if Marilou might have been taking advantage of Roger. Perhaps he realized this and reacted violently. Their suspicions deepened when they uncovered documents that showed police had made several visits out to the property in the months prior to Marilou's disappearance. They also learned that Roger had filed a personal protection order against Marilou and her sons about a year earlier, alleging that he was afraid of them. However, when asked about this, Roger claimed the whole thing was a misunderstanding. He said that they had since reconciled their differences, and that the relationship between him and Marilou was a loving and caring one. Roger was backed up by Marilou's sons. They said that they also believed that their mother and Roger were in love, and that they didn't think there was any way he could be involved in her disappearance. They also told police that since the beginning of the relationship, Roger, who they affectionately referred to as Grandpa, had treated them like they were his own children. The more detectives looked into Roger, the more they too became convinced that he and Marilou's boys were telling the truth. Roger did seem incredibly distraught and concerned about his missing girlfriend, and so far he had been more than forthcoming when it came to things like questions and allowing searches of his property. In addition to this, authorities questioned whether Roger would have even been physically capable of hurting Marilou. In addition to being in his 70s, Roger was not in good health. He was clearly struggling with alcoholism and was spending a good chunk of time confined to his bedroom. As investigators were about to learn, though, there was someone who was both capable and motivated that wanted Marilou out of the way. Or should I say, a group of someones. And this group seemed determined to bring Roger and Marilou's relationship to an end, no matter what the cost. After effectively ruling out Roger Blanchard in their missing persons case, detectives with the Macomb County Sheriff's Office moved on to looking for other potential suspects. It didn't take long for them to find some with quite the compelling motive. It turned out that Roger had 5 adult children from his previous marriage, and unlike Scott, not all of them were as convinced that their father had found love again. They were concerned about Roger's alcohol abuse and felt that Marilou was taking advantage of him, believing that she was simply a gold digger. When police questioned Roger's children, they reportedly weren't shy about showing their lack of concern for Marilou's disappearance. They clearly saw the relationship as a threat to their own inheritances, and apparently seemed totally indifferent to the idea that something really awful might have happened to her. Things got a whole lot more concerning for investigators when they learned that things had been tense between Marilou and Roger's children for some time before she went missing. In fact, when detectives dug deeper, they discovered that most of what they had found earlier that they initially questioned Roger about really had more to do with his kids. For example, those times that police had been called to the house, while they were all minor domestic incidents, almost every one of them had been concerning some conflict between Marilou and one of Roger's children. The personal protection order was a similar, albeit more convoluted story. The previous summer, Roger's kids decided that they wanted him to go to rehab for his drinking. He agreed, and almost as soon as he left, the children seized the opportunity to kick Marilou and her sons out of his house. They packed all of their stuff into a moving truck, told Marilou that Roger didn't want her there anymore, and explained that she needed to get out. Marilou was angry and heartbroken over what had happened, but she knew she really had no choice but to leave, especially since she was led to believe that this is what Roger wanted. She and her sons found a new apartment in neighboring Shelby Township and quickly moved in. The thing was, though, Roger had no idea what his children had done. When he found out, he was furious, especially when he learned that they had actually gone a step further. They had used their power of attorney to file the personal protection order that detectives had found, the one that claimed that he was afraid of Marilou and her sons. After figuring out what had happened, Roger checked himself out of rehab and went looking for Marilou. He had a mutual friend reach out first because by this point he no longer knew how to contact her, and eventually was able to explain everything. The personal protection order was not granted and thrown out after Roger got involved, and once everything was settled, Marilou and the boys moved back in with him. Needless to say, none of this looked very good for Roger's kids. In fact, detectives were now wondering if they had been so determined to end their father's relationship that they might have resorted to murder. However, despite extensive questioning and surveillance, authorities weren't able to find any evidence that Roger's children were involved in Marilou's disappearance. To their frustration, detectives had hit another dead end. At this point, the situation was getting dire. Days were passing and there was still no trace of Marilou Johnson anywhere, nor any evidence of what might have happened to her. Luckily, investigators were finally about to get their first big lead. It began when they discovered that there was actually one more of Marilou's belongings that was unaccounted for. One that just might explain a lot about her sudden disappearance. Though detectives had realized fairly quickly into their investigation that a number of Marilou Johnson's possessions were missing, these consisted for the most part of essentials and small personal items. Her purse, wallet, ID, cell phone, glasses, things that she would have taken with her on any ordinary trip out of the house. However, several days in, authorities learned that there was something else of hers that had vanished, and its absence was a lot more suspicious than these other items. What was missing was a piece of jewelry, a necklace to be more specific. It was one that Roger had purchased for Marilou as a gift, and let's just say, it was not your everyday walking around kind of jewelry. The necklace featured 22 white diamonds, which surrounded 5 more, much larger yellow diamonds. Its price tag? More than $250,000. Understandably, detectives concluded that something so valuable could have easily been the motive for a serious crime. This opened up a whole new aspect to the case. Maybe they were dealing with a robbery gone wrong. No sooner had authorities arrived at this theory than they received a second lead. It came from a woman named Tanya DeSano. She was Roger's longtime friend and housekeeper, and was also a friend of Marilou's. Tanya said that on June 12th, so 2 days before Marilou's disappearance, she was busy doing her usual cleaning when she heard a knock at the door. She answered and saw a man she recognized, 37-year-old David Wright. Tanya knew David as the handyman/plumber at the property, though like pretty much everyone who worked for Roger, he operated somewhere in the murky territory between friend and employee. It was pretty common for Roger to hire his friends to do things, or otherwise become friends with the people he hired. Anyway, on this particular day, Tanya said that David seemed kind of off. For starters, he looked surprised to see her there, commenting that he thought she only worked on Tuesdays, even though it was a Tuesday. After that, he said he needed to speak with either Roger or Marilou about the hot tub. He said he got a call that it was broken and that he had figured out the part he needed to fix it. When Tanya explained that Marilou wasn't home and that Roger wasn't feeling well, so he wasn't available, David became incredibly agitated. He ended up leaving, but Tanya said she was unsettled enough by the interaction that she bolted the door when he left. Intrigued by Tanya's story, detectives brought David Wright in for questioning. To their surprise, he not only spoke about his interaction with the housekeeper, but he also claimed that he had returned to Roger's house on the day of Marilou's disappearance. David said that he had arrived at the property around 2:30 that afternoon, and at this time had brought the part with him to fix the hot tub. He said that when he told Marilou how much it cost, though, she blew him off, saying that it was too expensive and that she would need to talk to Roger before moving forward. David said he was annoyed by this because he had already purchased the part, but that he left shortly afterwards. Realizing that David had just admitted to being the last person to see Marilou before her disappearance, police pushed him to see if they could get any more information. However, he quickly became angry and ended the interview. He said that he never would have done anything to hurt Roger or Marilou. After all, Roger was a close friend and was the one who gave him the money to start his business. Despite David's denials, detectives were incredibly suspicious. The fact that he had placed himself at the mansion right before the disappearance was too much to overlook. However, if authorities were going to prove anything, they needed evidence. Fortunately, they would soon find what they were looking for, but it would take a little luck and a lot of patience. After becoming convinced that David Wright was hiding something, Macomb County detectives decided to put him under surveillance. At first, this didn't produce much of interest. However, on the afternoon of June 23rd, things took an abrupt turn. While following David, officers saw him pull into a local coin-operated car wash. He drove into one of the bays, parked there, and purchased some spray cleaner from a machine. Rather than washing his vehicle, though, David headed directly into the back of his pickup truck. After spending a considerable amount of time there, he emerged holding a black plastic trash bag. He then walked over to a garbage container, threw the bag inside, and then took off. As some of the officers continued to follow David, a few others went to take a look at the plastic trash bag he had just disposed of. Disturbingly, they immediately realized that there was blood inside. The bag was quickly sent off for testing, and detectives were confident that they had finally found some physical evidence. They notified the officers who were following David, who were able to pull him over after they discovered that he wasn't driving with a proper license plate. He was arrested during this traffic stop. Unfortunately, it was at this point that authorities got some information that threatened to derail everything. The results of the blood analysis from the trash bag had come back, and not only did it not belong to Marilou Johnson, it wasn't even human. Before they could even wrap their heads around this curveball, detectives got word of another development. When officers had patted down David Wright during his traffic stop arrest, they had discovered something in his front right pocket. It was a small plastic bottle, similar to one that might be used to hold prescription drugs. This bottle didn't have pills in it, though. No, instead it contained 22 white diamonds and 5 larger yellow ones. After comparing the gems to pictures of Marilou's missing necklace, authorities were convinced that they were the same diamonds. When detectives sat down with David in an interview room and confronted him about what they had found, he first said that he wanted to make a phone call. After a short conversation with his mother, he stated that he was ready to do the right thing and confess. What David told investigators next was truly horrifying. It turned out that when David had mentioned before about Roger giving him money for his business, he had only really shared half of the truth. Yes, Roger had provided him with the $50,000 to get his plumbing business off the ground. As we've established by now, Roger was generous with a lot of people. However, that $50,000 was supposed to be a loan, and David had never paid it back. That was only the beginning, though. After more than a year without a single payment, David had the audacity to approach Roger for more money. He said that he needed another $50,000 for the business. In reality, David had gambled, loaned, and just generally pissed the money away. At this point, Roger was pretty angry with David, but he offered him a deal. He said that if David could start making some regular good faith payments, he would think about giving him some more. In the meantime, David also agreed to do work for Roger around his property without charging him for labor.
I've always been friendly with Roger.
Okay.
He gave me the money out of the kindness of his heart. I bluffed it away, here and there. Met a girl, spiced up her world, and spent money, loaned my brother-in-law lots of money, and I just tried to come up with ways of getting money, here and there.
Unfortunately, David's other way of getting money was essentially just coming up with schemes to rip Roger off. This is what had happened with the part for the hot tub. When David went to pick up the part from the plumbing supply store, he asked the sales guy to wildly mark up the listed price on the invoice. That way he could overcharge Roger and make an extra $1,000. What David hadn't counted on, though, was Marilou noticing the discrepancy in the price. David said when he went over there on June 14th, he could tell that she knew what he was up to. When she canceled the job, something inside him snapped. He said that as they were talking by his work trailer that afternoon, he saw a knife in his bag. Next thing he knew, it was in his hand, and he was holding it up to Marilou's throat.
We're talking about the jacuzzi. I told her how much it'd be about. She said she'd have to talk to Roger. We were standing by the trailer, putting the tools away, and I saw a knife in my bag, and I turned around and I grabbed her. I told her, I said, Marilou, I need some money. She said, what are you doing? What are you doing?
David said that he intended to force Marilou into the back of his trailer. He figured that he could hold her for ransom and that maybe Roger would pay to get her back. As the pair were struggling, though, David claimed he tripped. All he remembered seeing after that was blood everywhere. He insisted that everything was an accident.
I hit her right here, around the throat. I was pushing her in the trailer. She fell down. I fell over the top of her. I pulled her up. I looked down and I just saw blood. I stepped out of the trailer. She was just laying there looking at me. Went in the trailer. Puddle of blood was even bigger. She wasn't moving. I picked up the knife and I poked her. She didn't move. It was an accident.
After realizing that Marilou was dead, David said he panicked. He ran inside, grabbed her purse, and then used a hose to wash off any blood evidence on the driveway. Later that night, David said he drove about 30 miles away to Cass Lake, where his parents owned a property. He threw Marilou's purse containing her belongings into the water, then buried her body in a shallow grave in a wooded area. At first, David planned for this to be the end of the cover-up. However, a week later, he panicked again when he saw a story on the news. The segment was about a murder where police had used cadaver dogs to find a body that was buried. Worried that he might get caught, David drove back out to his parents' lakefront property in the middle of the night and dug up Marilou's remains. He covered her body in plastic, attached cinder blocks to her feet, and then paddled Marilou out into the middle of the lake in an aluminum rowboat, where he once again disposed of her remains. The final piece of the puzzle for investigators came when David explained that after dumping the body for a second time, he drove around the nearby township looking for roadkill. He figured that if he put an animal in the grave where Marilou had originally been buried, that even if authorities found it, the evidence might be contaminated. David had eventually come across a possum, which he picked up off the road in West Bloomfield Township. This is where he had been spotted by that police officer I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Obviously, the officer had no idea what David was actually doing. But yeah, following that interaction, he had driven back out to his parents' lake house one final time, where he buried the possum in the original gravesite. The plastic bag from this was the one that investigators had found at the car wash shortly before they arrested David. Needless to say, detectives were pretty stunned and horrified by all of this information, but they still had a major job ahead of them. They needed to find Marilou's body. This would turn out to be difficult, even with David Wright's help. He couldn't remember the exact location where he had done everything, and on top of this, most of it had unfolded in the dark. For 2 days, police dive teams scoured the murky, sandy waters of Cass Lake. Ultimately, they would find both Marilou's body and her purse. Marilou's body was discovered with the help of a local fisherman who was using an underwater camera in the lake. Police had to go down roughly 30 feet to retrieve her remains. Marilou's purse, meanwhile, was found to contain almost everything of hers that was missing. This included her necklace, which was found to have been stripped of all of its diamonds. The indentations matched perfectly with the gems that authorities had found during David's arrest. When Marilou's body was sent off for an autopsy, medical examiners quickly found evidence that conflicted with the story David Wright had told police. In addition to the wound to her throat, Marilou had at least 6 other stab wounds, 2 of which had pierced her heart. Now, detectives had been skeptical of David's claims from the beginning, but this was something else entirely. There was no way Marilou's death was any kind of accident. She had been brutally murdered. This was less surprising when authorities dug a little further into David's past and learned that he had quite the criminal history. 1990, felony assault with a dangerous weapon. 1992, larceny. 1995, auto theft. 1998, arson. He also had an equally long history of violence and anger issues. In one incident in 2004, David had been charged after getting into an argument over a parking spot with a man at Home Depot. David responded to the conflict by grabbing a metal pipe out of his truck and chasing the man around while swinging wildly. He ended up pleading guilty to aggravated assault and was sentenced to probation and anger management counseling. Some of the most disturbing accounts about David came from his ex-wife Susan. In one incident, he apparently threw a full-size recliner across a room while screaming. In another, he got so mad during an argument that he beat in the windshield of his own truck. And in another, he had punched Susan in the face, breaking her nose. She went to court to obtain an order of protection from him in 2006. Unbelievably, even with all of the evidence stacked against him, and after giving a full confession, David opted to plead not guilty to Marilou's murder and to go to trial. During the proceedings, he even tried to get his confession thrown out on the grounds that he only confessed because his mom told him to. Unsurprisingly, this tactic did not work, and the jury found David Wright guilty in the summer of 2008. He was sentenced to life without parole for larceny, kidnapping, and felony murder. If I had to sum up this case in the fewest words possible, I would probably go with relentless gut punch. I can't imagine how awful it must have felt for Marilou's loved ones as they waited for any information about her disappearance, only for the situation to just get steadily worse and worse. Obviously, those hardest hit by Marilou's death were her 3 sons, who had now lost both of their parents tragically at such a young age. We weren't able to find too much information about them in our research, but hopefully wherever they are, they're doing well. As for Roger Blanchard, sadly, his health only grew worse after Marilou's murder. He passed away in November of 2008, just a few months after David Wright was convicted. According to reports, he was generous with Marilou's sons right up until the end of his life. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.